morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anil. I am part of Microsoft Cybersecurity Solutions Group. I am based in New Delhi, India, and I'm part of the Asia Time Zone team from Microsoft. So in this first session today, we are going to talk about the modern security perimeter. And we will talk about how this is different from the traditional network-based security perimeter. Now, if we first talk about how the world of technology is evolving, we'll talk about 4 key areas. The first one is connectivity. And if we see over last 6 to 7 years, if you look at the number of users worldwide that have got internet coverage, today it stands over 55%, whereas this number in 2010 was around 30%. So it means the number of users who have access to internet, either via broadband or via mobile internet, is constantly growing up, right? So it's almost 2/3 of the world, probably in next 2 to 3 years, that's going to be covered with the internet connectivity. Number 2, the device and user experience. So with better internet access, now users have access to modern mobile devices, so they can access applications and data from any location, anywhere, right? So this means they have a better experience or a different experience in comparison to past on these new mobile devices. Now what happens with these applications now being on the cloud, so online services, and with these modern mobile devices, what is happening is that network perimeter is getting more and more blurred. So it means that people can access these services, or they expect to access their corporate services from any location of their choice or from any device of their choice. Now with this, the threat landscape is also growing, because now your services are on the cloud and your employees and users are accessing these services from different devices. And because of that, the attackers are also employing modern techniques. So if you look at the modern attacks, they are more and more persistent, they are more and more well-funded, they are more and more state-sponsored, and attackers are looking at modern techniques to get into your environment to steal user identities and use those to infiltrate your network and get access to sensitive information. So with all of this change happening, what is required is a change in the security strategy of the company, right? So you need to look at how can we look at a modern security strategy which can consider this connectivity, the new mobile device experience, the new perimeter which is far beyond the defined network perimeter, and how can it address these modern threats. So as we spoke earlier, here are some stats from various surveys that more and more employees are now using non-sanctioned apps. So what does that mean? It means that as an IT, you may not really have authorized certain applications which are being offered as an online service, but a good number of your employees is already using that. So as per some of the surveys, over 80% of the employees are actually using non-sanctioned applications. And I have even spoken to banks where employees without the knowledge of the IT have actually procured some applications across various departments to share documents within the group, or including with people outside the company, right? There are 61% of the applications that IT is not even aware of that it is being used in the environment. So with this, what's happening is the whole IT landscape is constantly changing. If you look at traditionally, all of the IT is within a well-defined network perimeter, where you have your servers, you have your devices well connected within the LAN network, and then there's a small extension to mobile devices through gateways, through VPNs, right? So that's how it extended over to the users over the internet a few years back. And then you look at SaaS services coming into picture. Now this happened because now all the businesses want to provide a better experience to users, better productivity from devices and locations of their choice. So SaaS adoption became quite natural, and along with that, there is this modern experience across mobile devices, and Internet of Things came along, and then you have infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So with all of this, what really happened is the perimeter actually expanded from within your well-defined network perimeter to over the internet, right? So now you need to look at how do you really put controls on this new network boundary, which is well beyond your, your intranet network. Let's talk about some of the, challenges with the perimeter-based network security approach or the perimeter-based security models. Now, one of the first things is that there is a lot of heavy security that is required to safeguard a perimeter. So, which means there's a lot of emphasis on how do you protect your perimeter around the network. So you have a lot of emphasis on firewalls, VPNs, proxies, right? So IDS solutions, IPS solutions. Now, on the other side, there is not much emphasis given to what happens once the attacker has penetrated the network perimeter. So once the attacker has landed inside the network, because it's just like VPN, right? So you let a person come through the VPN, but once he is through the VPN, he's basically going to access whatever services are exposed over the VPN for him. So there is no further check. So you trust him as long as he's gone through or he's come through the VPN network. The other thing is, if there's one endpoint compromise, let's say that's the way I spoke earlier, right? So if someone has compromised one endpoint or he has compromised one part of your perimeter security, that means he can easily do a lateral movement within the environment and end up compromising the rest of the network, or escalate his privilege and actually do internal recon, look up your sensitive resources, and actually reach there and do exfiltrate sensitive information from the network. So it becomes really easy for an attacker to actually penetrate a perimeter network and then do internal movement. So the perimeter-based security models also require heavy investment on software and appliances like firewalls, gateways, VPN, and the other thing is that cloud services are very difficult to fit in this perimeter-based security model because cloud services are outside of the network perimeter, right? So you cannot make them all the way go through your perimeter network. Or if you do, or if you try to do that, it becomes very expensive because of the latency, because of the connectivity, all of those considerations. So the perimeter-based security models don't really fit the cloud-native services which are being offered from outside of your perimeter. And users are accessing those from outside of your perimeter through their mobile devices. So like we spoke earlier, it's a quick depiction of the same, right? So attacker compromises one device, penetrates your perimeter, lands on, let's say, one of the devices. It's very easy for him to do an internal movement or lateral movement and then actually compromise other services inside your network. Now, how do we address this? So we talk about the zero trust network. I'm sure you are hearing a lot about zero trust networks these days. So we'll talk a little bit about that and also what is the Microsoft approach with zero trust networks. So number one, if you talk about what are zero trust networks, they are basically based on the assumed breach philosophy. So we always assume that there is one, either a user, device, at least something which is compromised already in your environment, and therefore it basically looks for verifying a user's access to every resource every single time, right? So it's basically on the philosophy of never trust, right? So always verify users' access to a device, to a resource, to a service, and we'll talk more about that word aspect. Number two, why. If we talk about why, so we spoke about why perimeter-based security models are weak. So we spoke about that, why they don't fit the cloud services, right? And then it's also very easy to penetrate network-based perimeters, perimeter security models, and then the zero trust network basically provides, so based on the assumed breach philosophy, based on always verify philosophy, they provide much higher security for organizational resources. And how do we really achieve this? It's basically determining trust and getting access based on user signals, device signals, and cloud intelligence data. So user signals is when we consider the facts that who is the person who is trying to access the device, what group does he belong to, is there any risk that this user poses to the organization in terms, does he have his credentials compromised already, or is there any suspicious behavior on part of this user? Or if you talk about devices, so let's say if the user is coming from a device which probably have a compromise, an attacker already sitting on the device having compromised it, or let's say the device is probably part of a botnet network, or probably the device is not compliant to the policies that you have set up for your organization, right? So we basically grant access based on user signals from device signals and also based on the cloud intelligence data. So how do we really achieve that, right? So in the past, in the perimeter-based security models, what we do is we have well-defined network perimeter where we put all of our security efforts, right? So we put a lot of efforts in getting access through the network perimeter, through firewalls and VPNs and proxies and all these devices. Now, with the zero trust model, we look at identity as a new control plane, where we say authentication is going to be that, the same perimeter that we used to have as a network in the old world, right? So securing access to these resources, the resource can be on the cloud, it can be a SaaS service, the resource can be on infrastructure as a service, it can be sitting on Azure, it can be sitting on AWS, or the resource can be sitting on-premise, right? So it can be one of the web applications that you want to make available to your users over the internet. So what we are saying is that all of that should be basically integrated with a single identity, where at the time of authentication, leveraging the Azure Active Directory, we are able to grant access to the right people to services they are authorized to access. And we can do that for partners and customers as well. And there are certain advantages of doing this in a new way, where you no longer have to set up the cumbersome federations between forests and domains, which you used to do in the old world. You can grant access to employees from inside the network, from outside the network. You can cover your on-premise services, you can cover cloud services. So what we're saying is that identity is going to serve as a new control plane in a zero trust model, right? And very importantly, we talk, the assumption is also that we treat every resource as being on the open internet. So it's no longer the world where a resource is inside the network perimeter and you're letting a user come through the VPN connection, right? So which means if you let a person come through a VPN network, you're letting him access whatever you publish over the VPN. So he is coming inside your network, right? So he's coming inside your network through the VPN, and then it's easier for him to do a lateral movement within the network. If you look at on the opposite, in the zero trust model, what we say is make everything available to the user over the internet. So if you have to publish an application, instead of publishing it via VPN, so letting the user come in, you would publish it using a proxy service, and its reverse proxy service, and make it available to the user over the internet. So with that, what you can do is you can always verify who is the person, what device he's coming from, what location he's coming from, what specific workload he's trying to access. So you can have different policies for, let's say, OneDrive for business and a different policy for a in-house web application, right? And also you can determine what is the risk score for this person or for this particular session that he's trying to establish. Is he coming from a location that he never traveled to in the past, right? or is he really, showing up in a new location which is impossible for him to travel to from the previous location where he accessed from. So you are basically considering all of your services to be published or published over the internet instead of letting the user come in through the VPN and access whatever he likes or whatever is available to him. And you are verifying his access for each and every resource based on these various factors. So what we say is never trust, always verify, right? So always verify your user's access to every specific resource and every single time. And in the zero trust model, so even if a user has or an attacker has compromised a device, it doesn't really mean that he can automatically spread to the rest of the services or rest of the resources that you have made available or you have within your corporate environment, right? So a user may have a device compromised, but because we are talking about validating a person's access to every service, every time he's trying to access that, we are saying in the real time we are able to isolate that person or that device that is compromised, right? So that's the approach that we take with zero trust network model. And there is no perimeter, so a device or a user can be inside your corporate network or he can be outside your corporate network. Similarly, the service that you're trying to protect can be inside your network, in the perimeter network, or it can be a cloud service, right? So if you look at building end-to-end zero trust networks, right? So on the left-hand side, you would see a lot of cloud services, or most of the cloud services, either in a SaaS model, or in a platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, or even on-premise services which are to be made available to employees over the network. And on the right-hand side, let's take the example of a device. Let's say it's a Windows 10 device, right? So what are we doing is on the endpoint, we are putting these security controls right as part of the platform, and we will cover a lot of these in following sessions by my colleagues. So the built-in security that is there as part of the device, and that's the approach that we are taking to secure the endpoint. And then we have the controls on top of that. So traditionally you have group policies, you have configuration manager or other management agents. Now you can look at the modern management approach with Windows Intune, MDM, or MAM for, let's say, iOS and Android devices. So what we are doing is we are securing the device so that the data that rests on the device is secure, right? So it's not easy for attackers to compromise the device itself and exfiltrate the data or launch an attack on this device from another device, right? So we're securing, or we are putting a lot of efforts to securing this device. Like things like credential guard, exploit guard, and we'll talk more about those. Encryption on the device with BitLocker encryption or BitLocker to go, right? On top of that, we are investing in EDR services. So Windows Defender ATP, which provides a risk score of the device, which tells is it high risk device, it's a medium risk device based on the kind of compromise that is there on the device. We do a lot of threat analytics to determine is there any suspicious behavior that this device or this user is showing while he's accessing your services, right? From this device to the service in the backend, it can be a service on cloud, it can be a service on premise. We are saying let's secure the communication channel between the endpoint to the service, right? So this is TLS encryption. Now, when we talk about the identity as a control plane, right? So that's where we put identity as a first layer of defense, and we talk about controls which are provided by Azure Active Directory conditional access. So yeah, so if I talk about conditional access, so it's the identity perimeter management, where this is able to check the risk score of the device. This is able to check the compliance status of the device. This is able to check the risk score of the user himself. Does he have his credentials compromised, for example? So we have many of these investments here in Azure Active Directory identity protection. So we can check the leaked credential, we can do behavioral analytics, right? So that's how we determine is there a risk which is being posed by this user before he is allowed to access the service. If required, we can ask for a multi-factor authentication. We can do B2B and Windows Hello for Business. So there are many of these security components which are available as part of the identity based perimeter. And then on top of that, we talk about visibility. So Microsoft Cloud App Security does have API integration into most of these services on the cloud. And then it can also govern access in the real time. So it can say, for example, if a user is coming from a non-managed device and he's trying to access one of your services, let's say Exchange Online or OneDrive for Business to access your files or access his files on the cloud, Cloud App Security can actually provide a limited access in case the person is coming from a device you're not sure about, right? So you can say only allow browser-based access so that the person gets access to the service, but then he can only do things online on a browser. He doesn't have to download documents offline. And even if he does that, the document should be encrypted so that any unauthorized use can be prevented for that sensitive information. So all of that is happening through Cloud App Security. So API for deep visibility into apps, session control, limited access for real-time control on the user session that he's trying to establish, right? And also it can take an action at the identity layer. So it can say if a user is showing suspicious behavior, then suspend that user in the real time. In addition to that, there is Azure Information Protection, which is actually enabling the discovery of sensitive information on premise, on the endpoints, do the data classification, do the labeling, and apply the right protection on the sensitive information. Right? So this again does have an integration with Cloud App Security so that we can do the same thing on data that is stored on cloud or in-house on your file shares, right? So eventually you would plan to move file shares to online services like OneDrive for Business, but as long as you have them, Azure Information Protection does have a component which helps you discover sensitive information, and we'll do a deeper discussion on that in the second session that I have on information protection. And most importantly, having a visibility of all of this to your SOC environment, right? So through integration through APIs, for example, we have the Cloud App Security which integrates with Azure AD, or if you have a SIEM solution which wants to directly collect logs from cloud services such as Azure Active Directory to gather the user sign-in activities, the audit logs, who is doing what the person is trying to access. So it can actually connect and gather these logs from these services directly, right? So it's very important for the SOC to have this visibility. And Microsoft also provides the visibility, centralized visibility through services like Cloud App Security. We have now the Azure Security Center, we have the Graph APIs, and I think if you're aware of the recent announcements that we did at RSA, so we also have the Azure Sentinel service, which is gathering all of these events and providing a SIEM as a service offering on the cloud, right? So you can gather all these logs from the cloud services. You can also gather all logs from on-premise environments and then do a correlation and ML and AI on the cloud itself, right? So this is how we help organizations build zero trust networks. And like I spoke earlier, I'll do a little more discussion on the conditional access piece because that is, like the center of this approach. And with the conditional access being in place, what we are able to do is we are able to provide access to the users who are coming from your own environment, which is on-premise. We synchronize identity from on-premise, from AD on-premise. We look at federating with consumer IDs. We look at federating with ADFS, right? So we look at then covering devices varying from Android, iOS, macOS, Windows. And then in terms of location, we can determine the location of the user based on the corporate network from geolocation. And in terms of apps, we can determine whether it's a browser-based application access or is it a rich native client application, right? So the conditional access put all of these parameters in consideration, and based on these, you can have static policies as well as dynamic policies. So the static policies are basically based on the combination of who is the person, what device he's coming from, is it a compliant device, is it a risky device, what location he's coming from, right? So is it a location which is known for attackers using to compromise some of our services? Is he coming from a browser-based application, right? Or is he coming from a native application? So based on these parameters, you can define static policies, as well as we provide machine learning to determine the real-time risk assessment of the user session, right? So in a matter of milliseconds, we are able to determine if this user has his credentials compromised, right? Or is this person showing a suspicious behavior? So we do all of that at the time of user trying to access the service. So based on these policies, based on the risk assessment, we're able to provide various controls. So which means you can either say allow or block access. For example, if a person is coming from a device which has a high risk score, and he's trying to access one of your services, let's say OneDrive for Business, which stores sensitive information. So you can take an action in the real time to isolate that device and tell the user, show him a notification that, hey, you're coming from a risky device, please work with the IT to resolve the risk on the device, and then you can come back later, access the service. Or you can say, you're coming from a device which I don't know about, right? So you're coming from a device which the corporate IT does not manage. It's a non-compliant device that I don't know about. So what you can say in such a case is that you can say, I don't allow you to access from native client, I only let you access from a browser, and then and do not download any documents from there. Or you can say very simply, hey, I know you are a trusted user, you have a domain joined device, you have a compliant device, but since you're coming from network outside of the corporate environment, you could be somebody else. So require to do a multi-factor authentication in that case, right? Or you can say force password reset because the user has his credentials already compromised. Or you can say block legacy authentication so that no one can misuse that and bypass the multi-factor authentication. So you can do this for all of these services which are on the cloud, on SaaS, as a SaaS service, or maybe on-premise, published over the internet through the reverse proxy solution, right? So with that, we'll do a quick demo of a user session. Let me switch to the browser. What I'm going to do is open a private window and log in as a user to access my application dashboard. Okay, so I'm opening a private window. This is a non-domain joined device, and I log in as a user. All right, so I put in my password. So I log into the My Apps dashboard, where I would see all the application that my corporate IT has published for me. And it's a list of all the apps: Salesforce, Outlook, OneDrive, in-house apps. And if I try to access, let's say, Outlook application, based on the policies, since the user is coming from a device which is not part of the domain, and the IT does not know if this is a compliant device or not. So in this case, and then the user is also coming from outside the corporate network in this scenario. So what we are going to see is there is a multi-factor authentication which is required for this person at this moment, right? So I have that on my mobile phone, and once I approve this from my phone, the person is going to get access to the service. Now, since this person is still coming from a device which is not known to the corporate IT, what we are saying is that, hey, we let you access the service since you passed the multi-factor authentication check. However, since you're coming from a device which is not really compliant, or I don't know how secure that is. We are only going to let you access the service on a browser, and it is going to be a monitored access, right? So we are going to control what do you do with this application once you are allowed to access the service. So it's not that we allow you to access the service and you have full control to download the documents, to download emails. So this is a scenario with Outlook application, so we will let this come up. And if you see, there are many of these emails, and I have one of the attachments, right? So I have a document which has been attached to an email. And what I will try to do with this is try to access this while I'm on a browser, as well as I'll try to see if I can take this document offline on this machine. So now let's first try to access this document on the browser itself. Right, so it's very simple operation. The document has no protection. It's a plain text document. Let's say I try to download this document, right? So since as a user I might want to do it, but at times if I'm coming from a device which is not really a managed device, what happens if I take this offline? So it allowed me to download the document in this case, and when I try to launch the document, we will see if the behavior is any different than opening on a browser online. So it's launching the document. It says authenticate, right? While on a browser I was able to access this document without any further authentication, but when I take the document offline, it prompts me for authentication. The reason is that, and if I don't do it, I'm not going to be able to access this document. It says the document is encrypted, and then you have to sign in with an account which has access to this document. So what we have done here, basically, we allowed the user to take the document offline, but since it is a non-trusted device, and since the document could be, could end up lying on a device you have no control on, we make sure that the document is encrypted before it is allowed to download on such a device, right? And if you go as an admin, if you go to your services and you want to have a visibility into what happened, we can actually see these alerts in the real time. So if you really want to monitor such an activity, so all of that can be actually monitored in the real time. So we spoke about the Cloud App Security solution in the past. So that is what made it happen. So the control which was implemented was part of the Cloud App Security solution. And as part of the activity logs, this is where we see all of these events coming up in the real time, right? So this is where I tried to download this document. In the real time, it got protected with Azure Information Protection. It's showing who is the person who is trying to access this document. This is the name of the document. This is the location right now where it is routing the traffic from. And this is the ISP address, the date and time. So it shows you all of these details about this person trying to access the service. And before that, it shows a session control redirection for this person. So he tried to access the service, but he got redirected to a session control and all of the same details. You can also see other information about this person, what else he's trying to do, what other alerts are there. He is also an administrator, so the sensitivity of this user profile is slightly higher than, or much higher than I would say rest of the users, right? And he has quite a bit of alerts already, quite a bit of matching policies. You would see what all locations he tries to access, so Taiwan, India, so that's me. I have been accessing from these various locations. I can also check for the IP addresses that I have used in the past, and if there have been any alerts from those locations. I can also see from here what are the other activities that this person has been doing, right? What are the other activities of the same type? Users trying to download documents on non-managed devices. So this tool really helps you get deep visibility and control on user activities which are possibly posing a risk to your security posture, right? And if you go to alerts, you would also see I have these alerts already. Not necessarily I have to have every single alert notifying me, but if you see, I got an alert for applying an AIP label on documents downloaded from Office 365, right? So this was triggered by a person we just saw in the demo. And you can actually, even from here, you can look at more details about this event, what happened, the same thing that we saw before. Or you can say either resolve or dismiss this incident which has happened. You can also see other activities like admin role changes, a person trying to access from an infrequent country, right? So this was about me just now. So I've never traveled to or never been coming from Japan or Taiwan as a location, so it's helping me get that visibility as an administrator in the backend. Right? So the other scenario could be where we talk about the administrators, right? So we have administrators that need to have access to various services in the backend, let's say Exchange, SharePoint Online, some other applications, or administrators who need to be password admins, who need to be information protection admin, who need to be compliance admin, right? So instead of making them an administrator 24/7, like you saw the case of the user just now, so he was a global admin, and he is also accessing these services from these locations which are probably he never been to, or probably his account itself could be compromised. So instead of making administrators or giving him an administrator role 24/7, we can also talk about letting the person request the admin privilege when he really needs to do something with that role, right? So that's what we do with Assuredly Privileged Identity Management, where we can define these various roles for these users. So for example, Ben, in this case, has been given access to these roles, and this is what he's eligible for, right? So are there any active roles? He can also see if he is already an admin for certain roles, or what are the roles that he is eligible to request access to, right? So in this case, I've given him global admin, password admin, information protection admin on demand, right? So you can always go and say, I want to activate the password administrator privilege because there is a help desk ticket where a user needs me to help reset his password, or I need to force a password reset because I think there is a suspicious activity on behalf of this user. So I can activate this role and provide a justification, provide a ticket number, so let's say, and ticket system, let's say ServiceNow, for example. So I can correlate that. And what is the justification? For, let's say, maybe, right, for some reason, and activate this role. So the person goes through a process where he provides a ticket number with ticketing system, then he provides justification, and then he can request activation of this role, right? And in the back end, while this is happening, we can talk about how do you set it up. So as an administrator, here, this is where you can have a visibility onto various roles, including Exchange Administrator, Global Administrator, Guest Inviter, Information Protection Admin, and you can see if there are certain users already part of this role who can request it on demand. So either they are permanent, they are eligible, and you can always add new member and then assign them to this role, right? So it becomes easier for the person to do his job, request access to these roles on demand, and then do their job, but they don't have to be exposed to a certain role all the time, 24/7, right? So you're reducing the risk portfolio or the risk exposure for that specific user by implementing the privileged identity management. So going back to the presentation, these are some of the statistics on Azure Active Directory. There are 19.3 million plus organizations using the service. There are 810,000 third-party apps which are already registered and various customers on Azure AD. Over 90% of the enterprises using Azure Active Directory as a central, basically a single source of identity to protect various services on premise and cloud. And the coverage for Azure AD is through various data centers across the world, through Azure data centers that we have. And there are various layers of security that we implement. So we talk about the physical data center security. So the access to resources, the infrastructure through the secure hardware and data segregation between different tenants, and the operational security monitoring, which is 24/7, and more than 3,500 global security experts securing the service, right? So this is all part of the service level agreements that we provide for our customers. There are, I think, the highest number of compliances that we follow, and depending upon what is your requirement based on the geography, we can help you find specific information on the compliance that you care about. But we have a big portfolio of compliances that we maintain as Microsoft for all of our cloud services. And we publish all this information at one place called Trust Center. So you can always go and visit and look up if we meet certain compliance requirements for you or not. And here are some of the customer stories, be from transportation, retail, government, health, education, and we can help connect with customers if you would like to speak, speak more and understand how they are securing their environment with Azure Active Directory. Right. So with that, I think I would wrap up the session, and I would be open to any questions. If there are any questions that we are taking online, I would be happy to take that. Thank you.